Hello and welcome to Discovering True Health, your weekly deep dive into health and wellness. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we get started with today's show, please hit that subscribe button. It helps us out a lot, and you'll stay up to date on all our upcoming shows. You can also check out additional information on our website, Instagram, and Facebook. All those links are below. Now, over half of all Americans suffer from at least one chronic disease, and the number is growing and expected to worsen over the next several decades among all age groups. Also, 1 in 5 adults in the US experience mental illness each year, and suicide is the second leading cause of death among people ages 10 to 34. Yet, we are the most technologically and scientifically advanced than we have ever been, and more medicated now than ever. And one would think with our science and technology and advancements in pharmaceuticals that these numbers would be drastically decreasing, not increasing. So where have we gone wrong? Today in Discovering True Health, we'll be taking a deep look at how our healthcare system and we as a society currently approach health and wellness and why we are at this current crisis point. We'll also be learning ways we can all take control of our own health and lifestyle shifts to improve our health and wellness. And we'll be discussing what EMFs are, how they impact our health, and what we can do about it. So my guest today is George Roman. George is a certified health coach and author of Return to Human: How Modern Medicine, the Media, and the Mundane Have Destroyed Our Health and How to Move Back Towards Optimal Health. George penned his book at the age of 19 years old after battling depression, anxiety, insomnia, and food sensitivities. He currently works with groups and individuals as a certified health coach and is passionate about finding practical solutions to real-world health problems. George is also a fellow podcaster and is host of Live Damn Well podcast. So thank you so much for joining me today, George.
Thank you so much for having me. I love the intro. One quick correction, which I always forget to tell people, is it's Jorge, not George. But thank you so much for having me today.
Beautiful. Well, I'd love to start with hearing your journey. What led you to your current path of discovering true health? Some important things you learned along the way, and what was the catalyst that motivated you to write your book at the age of 19?
Yeah, well, to be honest, and to put it simply, my book saved me. And without me realizing that new purpose, I don't think I would be here today. And now I'll take you back even before that, because my sophomore year of college was probably the most rough year I've ever had. I think for a very, very long time, I suffered from anxiety and insomnia ever since I was little. And so in a sense, I almost think it was a sort of burnout that I experienced. And with burnout often comes depression. And so that's what I experienced my sophomore year. And I start the book off with this little anecdote where I was in a doctor's office getting my sports physical done. And, they asked the same questions they always ask about, alcohol use or drug use or, safe sex practices and all that stuff. And then they got to the question, which they always do ask, but for some reason, I just had never paid attention to it until that point. And they asked the question, have you considered suicide? Like, any thoughts of suicide? And for the first time ever, I just broke down without even realizing why. There was no thought behind it. It was just this visceral emotional reaction of pain and of, I literally started sobbing in the room, and I was really confused. My doctor was really confused. We didn't know what was going on. And, I kind of wrote it off as like a bad day, and kind of pushed it down. But months later, into the swim season, that's when I started to really think about, maybe I should not be here anymore. Maybe I should end my life. And that's when I truly started thinking about, taking that next step of, okay, how am I going to do this, and planning it out. And, starting to become very, very distant from people. And in a sense, it was almost as if I was unconsciously trying to push everybody away, because I knew deep down that the people around me were the people who were preventing me from doing that, because I felt like I was in so much pain and so sad and so anxious every day that I didn't want to be here anymore. but I knew that the only roadblock was those people that I loved. And it's kind of a screwed up thing to say, but in a sense, I wanted them to stop loving me because that was the only way out that I knew. Because if they stopped loving me, then I could do that and not feel bad about it, right? I could take my life and not feel the repercussions of that. Now, having gotten to that point of almost taking my own life, I realized that there were people who were not going to give up on me that easily. And thanks to them, I'm still here. Thanks to them, I realized, okay, this is done. This is not an option for me anymore. And I decided firmly in that moment that I was going to do everything in my power to fix what was going on. And by that point, I was already super interested in nutrition and I was really into fitness. But I only really knew, diet and exercise is important, cut out animal products, eat whole grains, like the really simple stuff. And so I really didn't dig deep until I had to, until that point where it was like, if I don't fix something, I know where not doing anything about my health will lead me. So I need to figure out, okay, there's people saying it's about the gut microbiome. There's people saying it's about EMF exposure. There's people saying it's about trauma. I looked into everything. And at that point, I was so desperate that I left no stone unturned. I listened to as many people as I could, even the people who were considered quacks. I listened to them because I did not care. I was going to form my own opinion of those people so that I could figure out what was going on and fix my health and be a better human for the people around me, because without them, I would not have had any motivation to do anything at all. And so from that point on, I started to learn a lot and I started to implement a lot of things into my daily life. And that at that point, COVID hit, right? And then everything kind of, got even crazier, because the, increased isolation and all that stuff just really made me feel like the progress that I had made was kind of not as much progress as I wanted. It was like, two steps forward, one step back kind of thing. And I realized, okay, I've made a lot of progress with my health. How can I get people to make the same progress with their own health? Because it's possible. And it really frustrated me when we saw all of our health officials say, you can't do anything, stay home, bleach your groceries, wear 5 masks. Like there's nothing you can do to prevent a severe case of COVID. And at that point, it was pure feeling. For me, it was like, this cannot possibly be true. Like we can't just be told, we can't be disempowered like this. This isn't right. And so I started my book as a 12-page little document that was really my attempt to try to say, okay, how can I improve the immune health of myself and of my parents and of my family? And I was going to give that away on my website as like a free, just like 12-page downloadable thing. And then I kept writing more, and then 12 pages turned into 20 and 50 and 100, and we're left with a book at that point. So I was like, well, okay, I'm just going to write this book because I need people to understand, as I did, that there's so much you can do for yourself, and you are not disempowered as you are told you are. There's a lot that you can do, and I wanted to give that power back to people as well.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power. Thank you for sharing your journey. I mean, wow, it's powerful. And I think it's really important for a lot of younger people and parents of younger people to understand, because I feel like, you look at the statistics and numbers and, what you went through is happening, exponentially more and more to
It's
the
happening a lot.
yeah, these
Yeah.
children and young adults and teens. Can you kind of describe, while you were going through that, what were some of the main contributors in your early life that led you to felt your depression, fatigue, and anxiety, and eventually more suicidal at that time? Just so people listening, if they have children or if they are young adults, they can get a grasp on kind of what those things are to try to understand where that
Yeah.
could be coming from.
Absolutely. So I think I would break it up into two main categories, which would be like the lifestyle stuff and um, as in the mental stuff and the more physical stuff. Obviously, they feed into each other, but um, for me, my life began C-section, right? And we know now that if you have a C-section, you aren't given these beneficial microbes from the vagina and from the anus that you're supposed to be covered with, and it's supposed to seed your microbiome. I didn't get that. right? Luckily, I was breastfed, so I had that as an advantage, but that's how I kind of started life. And from there, a C-section really does predispose you to allergies and food sensitivities and, having, sort of gut dysbiosis, which is the case. It's implicated in like cancers and neuropsychiatric disorders. And so this gut dysbiosis is really a problem. And so that's kind of how I started out life. And ever since I could remember, actually, one of my earliest memories is being 3 years old and not being able to fall asleep and waking up like 5 or 6 times every night, falling off of my bed like almost every night because it was so severe how
Wow.
poorly I slept.
Wow.
And so I just thought that was normal. I never really questioned it. And I don't know if my parents actually knew the extent of that, but I was not really sleeping well like ever. And so that was always something I struggled with which feeds into this depression and anxiety piece a lot and really everything. And that's something that I still am struggling with. And then from there, there's a concept that I've been kind of playing around with in my head that's, you know, trauma. And these aren't my words, but these are the words of people way more like qualified than I am to say this stuff about trauma. But trauma is not what happens to you. Trauma is how you perceive what happens to you. And so for me, being in a biologically deficient state, insomnia, gut dysbiosis, honestly, who knows what else, being in that state of less resilience, I think predisposed me to whatever I was going on with my environment. It made it worse because I was already biologically at this lower level. So the childhood trauma that I would have, the problems that I would have would snowball a lot, would snowball very frequently. And I think that was because I wasn't sleeping and I had this gut dysbiosis thing and I had some food sensitivities. And so starting from that kind of wiggly foundation of health, I think it made everything else worse. And so it made, the social interactions really tough. It made falling asleep really tough. It made being positive really tough and, staying kind of like, happy really tough. So that's, I think, where it really began. And then I started swimming.
Mm.
Swimming is a great sport, don't get me wrong, but it was way too much. And I think it depleted me a lot. And I had a lot of injuries. It fed into the sleep piece because I wasn't recovering from normal daily life, let alone 4 hours of swimming every single day. So that I think made it worse. And I only recently, in the past 2 years, I stopped swimming. So I've been starting to recover from that. So that's really where I think it all came from. I was in a state of basically fight or flight for a really long time, and I never knew it. I just thought it was normal to be like super hyper and ADHD all the time and never be able to turn this off. I thought that was normal, and to a certain extent, I thought that was good. It was like, oh, I'm just like thinking all the time. Like this is a good thing because I'm going to solve more problems. It's like, nope, that's not how it works, right? Like you need to be able to turn off that fight or flight and actually digest your food, sleep, like make hormones not block the production of testosterone. Like you need to calm down. And so that was really the burnout that I experienced like 2 3 years ago. I think was from so many years of all that.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And I think, I've never, with all the guests I've had on, I haven't heard anybody discuss, the beginning of life and how you talk about being, having the C-section as opposed to being born, through the canal, and also breastfeeding. Those things are so important for like a good foundation.
Right,
And that's
absolutely.
the beginning of everything, of building our gut microbiome and having all those correct things. So thanks for sharing that. That's something that should be thought about very deeply, with bringing children into the world.
Yeah, definitely. Like, good nutrition at the start of life. And it also depends on like the health of your mom. It's like, I think I interviewed Dr. Stasha Gomanak, who's a neurologist, and she talked about how the vitamin D status of your mother will have an impact on like the breast milk and like the quality of that. And it'll have an impact on her microbiome, which will then have an impact on your microbiome. So yeah, absolutely. Like this generational thing that hopefully I'm going to break.
Right. Absolutely. And these are, and like you were talking about earlier, these are fall in line with the knowledge is power. Like, we have control over these things, and these are things we need to be educated on. So important. And also talking about the nervous system and the fight or flight. I mean, these are skills and tools every parent should know to train their kids in, regulating nervous system and all that kind of stuff, because it can lead, like you said,
Yeah, 100%.
domino effect and cause a lot of issues in childhood and later on life. Now, as I mentioned at the top of the show, 60% of American adults suffer from a chronic disease, and it's increasing, yet we're more medically advanced and scientifically advanced than ever. From what you've learned and the research you did for your book and what you experienced, why do you feel we're at this crisis point in our society? How does our healthcare system and our society as a whole need to shift our approach in order to live a healthier life and mitigate disease?
So I think we're at this turning point because it's not COVID. I think a lot of people are saying that it's COVID, why we've kind of noticed a lot of things. COVID has been this catalyst for kind of showing us all what the big picture is of things and showing us the flaws in things. And it's done that in a very abrupt way where it stopped society, right? It stopped, like, people lost their jobs, people lost some family members, like it was really tough. And so people had more time at home to just sit and think about things, which was bad and good because some people got very, very anxious. Like, mental illnesses like rose a lot. But it was a good and a bad thing because it allowed a time for self-reflection, which I think is often missing in this like very, very busy world that we live. And so I'm so sorry. I kind of forgot your question.
Well, kind of thinking about where we are, like, for example, we're
Yes.
our pharmaceuticals are very advanced. Our healthcare system
Yes.
approaches our health in a certain way. Our society kind of approaches health in a certain way, but yet, I mean, 60% of Americans have chronic disease. So what around our healthcare
Yes.
really needs to shift?
Yes, the crisis point. Yeah, so we're here because it's been a very, very long time that our healthcare system has been very broken. You'll hear a lot of people in, kind of my world of alternative and natural ancestral health say that it's a sick care system, not a healthcare system. It's true because a patient healed is a patient lost. So this is where we're coming from for who knows how many years. Before I ever set foot in this world, we probably had this sort of medical system. Now, that being said, that's more of the Western medical system, not so much of like the traditional medical system, like Ayurveda or like traditional Chinese medicine, which has been around for thousands of years, which doesn't get enough credit because literally just being that old, you're going to have some profound discoveries that, yes, it doesn't have the modern science that we have, but there's a lot of things right now that are being kind of proven or supported with the medical literature that is now supporting some herbs and some, foods and kind of things that were common practice in the older styles of medicine. So we're at this tipping point because we're in this age of information and misinformation, and we have so much more access to it than ever. For better or worse also, because that's also where I struggled with trying to figure out what was going on with my depression. A lot of people saying some really stupid things, a lot of people saying some really helpful things. And so, yeah, we're at this tough stage because now we have to be the ones that, we can't be treated like children, which we were kind of treated at like as like, a lot of the health professionals and health authorities, and politicians, which kind of treated us like children. Like, no, let's censor people who have different points of views because you are not intellectually capable of discerning what's true and what isn't. It's like, that's bullshit. Like, no, come on. Like, maybe to people who are children, like, sure, of course, but they don't even get to choose what they eat for dinner, right? Like, come on, like, let's be reasonable. If you're an adult, you should be able to think. You should be able to have voice your concerns about things, especially a novel drug or pharmaceutical. You should always be able to question things, and so, yeah, to kind of answer your question in a very long-winded way, I think we're at this kind of turning point because this pandemic has really made clear a lot of the broken pieces of our current medical system that maybe weren't as widely broadcasted before.
Absolutely. Yeah, and like you said, it's kind of brought more to light, with these extreme measures of censoring and not allowing other opinions in, this kind of very disconcerting attitude from authorities where it's like,
Yeah.
wait a minute, I can read a scientific paper,
Yeah.
figure it out. I can read research
Yes.
and figure it
Yes.
out. So absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, and that's not to say that like some of the voices that were censored were speaking the truth. I think some of the voices that were censored, like a lot of them were not good. Like a lot of them were saying a lot of crazy stuff, like crazy conspiracy stuff that's not true. Um, but there's always some little truth that you can get from like almost any perspective. It's got to have a little tiny tinge of truth.
Absolutely. And when it comes to any other type of science, there's always a discussion. And there's no such thing as, I'm right, you're wrong. There's always, like you said,
Yeah.
there's research and there's information to put the pieces of the puzzle together. So it takes, everybody having a discussion about it on both sides to kind of come into that center point. Now you've done a lot of
Yeah,
research
exactly.
and you've self-experimented with many different diets and practices when you started this journey. What are some important practices, lifestyle changes, and habits that helped you improve your quality of life, mental health, and your health and wellness in general?
Yeah, well, I think the first one was probably more of a mental one, which set up the following like physical changes. So it was not trusting what any one person said 100%, and trying it out yourself, like within reason, of course, like not doing something like absolutely crazy that someone says and trying it out, but like little modifications to diet and lifestyle. And so that was really, yeah, that was really, I think, the main thing that I talk about with all my clients is like you have to know that you are in n equals one experiment where n is just the number of subjects in the study, and that's your own personal study, and really approaching your health as your own personal journey of experimentation. And okay, let's keep a journal of your health and see, okay, I tried cutting out all carbs, nope, that sucks, I feel like shit, let's not do that. What is it about cutting out carbs that made me feel like this? Oh, well, maybe it's like an electrolyte issue. Maybe I wasn't having enough magnesium, potassium, and salt. Okay, let's try that. Let's see if that works. Okay, that worked. Or okay, that didn't work. Right. Like that has been this past like 2 years of self-experimentation. That's what I've kind of learned is you have to really be patient with yourself. There's no study that's ever going to tell you how you should live your life. Not a single study, not a single collection of studies that are going to tell you how to live your life. There are going to be pieces of it that's true, but there's quite a bit of bio individuality, and so that's on the one hand. On the other hand is being really careful about supplements, not jumping on like this kind of horde of pills that you have. I know that was me. Like I just spent a lot of my own money and honestly wasted a lot of my own money just trying to, trying the ashwagandha and trying this and trying that. And like some of them worked, but then it was tough to see what actually worked. So one thing that and I'll give full credit to Matty Lansdowne from the How to Not Get Sick and Die podcast. I interviewed him and I talked with him, and his big thing is one tweak a week. And so that's something that I've carried forward with my clients and with myself now. It's like, all right, if you're going to do something, try it for a week, see what are the results. What did you like about it? What did you not like about it? And go from there. Don't try to do everything at once. One, because you're not going to know what worked. And two, it's not sustainable. So those were kind of the two main pieces that started to help me with my journey.
Beautiful. And that's such a great point to make because everybody's body's different. And we need to realize there's no one size fits all in health. We all are diverse. We all will react differently. We all have different food sensitivities. An apple might be great for me. It might be horrible for you and cause inflammation, So, I mean, I know for me, it was very life-changing to do my food sensitivity testing. I worked with one of the doctors on my early shows and we did all that, work and changed all that. And that was a game changer. So I think that's a great point to make that people really need to
Yeah.
understand. And also our healthcare system kind of needs to kind of approach differently as well, as there's no one size fits all.
Yeah, and you know what? One other thing is that I've kind of learned the hard way. I'm a very, very perfectionistic person, and like very much to a fault. And that's also what I would say led to depression. But one thing that I've learned now is that you need to zoom out on your health journey, because if you are just like, let's say you want to try like a low FODMAP diet or something, and you try it for like a couple days and it's like, oh, well, this isn't working. Okay, now on to the next thing. It's like you're not giving this enough time for it to work or for it to not work. Like you got to be patient and zoom out enough to see that, yeah, don't overestimate what you're going to be capable of in a month, but don't underestimate what you're going to be capable of in a year. Like, be patient with the process.
Right. And I think it's important too, that brought up a thought about that's essentially what doctors are doing. They essentially, I mean, they have a certain amount of education, like this medicine will do this, but it is essentially at the end of the day, it's trial and error with each person because they don't know how
Yeah.
medication is going to work on your specific body as opposed to somebody else's, because everybody's DNA is different and it's going to react differently to that medication. So I mean, it's important we take
Yeah.
control of our own health in that way and really be specific about it, not just throw a bunch of vitamins at it.
Yeah, no, exactly. And like doctors are very, very good at the acute. And like I would never want to be with like a shaman if my knee broke. I'm gonna go to my primary care doctor. Like, I'm not playing around with that stuff, right? But they, yeah, it's almost like, sorry, there's just like a bunch of birds that just came out. So yeah, like they're good, and they, credit where credit is due, but they are good at like population level stuff, because that's where their protocols and pharmaceuticals come from. It's like, well, we took a group of 100,000 people and this worked for like 60% of them. That's good enough. Let's do it, right? And that's, I mean, that's okay. Like, that's limited, because they have a limited scope of practice. That's just what being like a MD nowadays kind of is. It's like, if you're going to help the most amount of people in your practice, you have to know what works for the most amount of people, not for everyone. That's changing now with lifestyle medicine and like personalized medicine, which is awesome. But definitely it's a different way of doing things.
Absolutely. And it's great if you're part of the 60% group, but not so great if
Yeah.
you're not.
Yeah.
And what would you say are some of the ways we can all take control of our own health and not be part of the part of the group that have chronic illness, and the kind of 1 in 5 and the 60% of the US that are not doing well?
Well, first, it's understanding that it's not a woo-woo concept to take back control of your health, and like, it's true and it's grounded in science. You absolutely can make very, very significant lasting changes in your health. So that's the first thing, is the mindset. The second thing is, and this is tough because you can oftentimes, if you go into the diet space, you're going to be so confused. You're not going to know what to do. So being very, very careful, make small changes. Do not get sucked into a certain dogma. If you have food sensitivities that you might not know about, that could be something to test for, testing for like CRP and inflammation, testing your vitamin D levels. But really the easiest ways for me to say, okay, this could be like a one size fits all for everyone. Like, the few things would be kind of ancestral living. So modeling what our hunter-gatherer ancestors have done forever, until we decided now that we know better than what we've been doing for thousands of years. So that would be, let's start with the morning, right? You wake up, let's get some sunlight in your eyes and on your skin. Let's set your circadian rhythm up. Let's release some dopamine and make you feel really good, and some endorphins from the sunlight, right? The beta endorphins that get released from sunlight. Let's make you feel good. And instead of dumping, some coffee in you and some, a donut fried in horrible oils at like, 6 a.m. in the morning, and kind of getting your body into this like fight or flight state so early in the morning. Let's do that. Let's get you some sunlight. Let's maybe do a little bit of meditation to kind of set the tone for how you want your day to be like. Set an intention for that day. Get to be really present. And then it would be, if you can, get 30 minutes, get an hour of sunlight during the day. Make some vitamin D on your skin. Get together with a group of friends or family. Have some community. Have some people that you feel those feelings of love for. Express gratitude towards them. Eat very nutritious foods. Now, again, a baseline of nutrition knowledge: eat whole foods. Just stay away from the processed foods, with an emphasis on protein. So get enough protein, eat whole foods, and you're like 80% of the way there, I think, with most people. Now, other people will be more complicated. You're going to have like some gut infections or low thyroid or whatever it might be that you're struggling with. But that's a really, really good baseline. And sometimes people really don't do the simple, free, easy stuff that anyone can do. Go outside, be in nature, breathe in the air. Maybe start your own garden and get some of your own fresh organic food. Like these are all very simple things that you can start to do. And it's all kind of modeled after our own ancestors. And for sleep, I guess, kind of making our way down to like the last end of our day would be, okay, did we have electricity for the majority of our time? No, we did not, right? So what does that mean? Well, okay, obviously it's not realistic to say don't ever look at your phone, turn off all lights like as soon as it's sunset. Okay, so this is where we get into biohacking, right? Where we're kind of modeling our ancestors, we're mimicking them in a sense. So whether that be like blue blocking glasses, which is a really great one that I recommend for sleep, and kind of like just covering your skin up. So because you have some receptors on our skin also for light, but kind of making some dim lights, maybe doing some red light therapy, like all this cool stuff that's biohacking is really just nature hacking. Like it's just like you're doing what our ancestors did, but you're using technology to get there. And so really those are the simplest things I would go for.
That was great. Thank you for sharing that. And I was thinking, talking about our ancestors, for example, Ayurveda and Chinese medicine, they knew about the gut microbiome 3,000 years ago. That's incorporated into their systems when Western medicine just figured it out, what, 2007?
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, it's
Yeah.
important to, like you said, use technology, but to kind of help us or help our bodies to recover from the negative effects of technology, I guess.
Yeah,
Balance.
100%, 100%. Yeah.
Now, in your book, you address issues around conflicting health information and half truths that are being propagated through the media. What are some of the half truths around health information out there that you debunked through your research that have impacted your health?
Mm, mm. So, well, the first kind of most important one is just that there's really not that much you can do for your health and that, your genes kind of rule your life. That would be a really big one because it's true, right? Like your genes, you get them and you can't change them. But what you can change is the expression of them, right? And so that's kind of a half truth right there that they're not, the emphasis is not on the whole story oftentimes in the mainstream. And so you can influence the expression of your genes by changing your mindset, by being more, gracious, having more gratitude, by limiting your exposure to toxic things in your environment, like whether it be cosmetics or whether it be cleaning products or whether it be foods, you can positively alter it also through certain nutrients. And so all of these things are things that I think weren't really talked about in their full light. And, this bled into the pandemic very severely. It's like we were told, okay, this is a virus that can cause this laundry list of things that it can cause. We don't really know why. We don't really know, how it's transmitted. And, to a certain point, of course, like the first few months, like no one knew what was going on. And like, I'm not like blaming anyone for that. But once we got into like a year, we kind of, knew what was going on. And at that point, it was like really, really unfair to say that you couldn't do anything, that you couldn't even go outside without wearing a mask, that you should be like, I know Australia had some really horrible lockdown measures. Like you couldn't even go outside without threatening arrest. So these were this really like kind of, I don't even want to call them half truths because it's just not true. But these things really bled into the pandemic and the way we saw, okay, what are the likelihood that you're going to infect someone if you're asymptomatic, or how much does a mask actually work, depending on the type of mask? Like we didn't get the full nuance of things. And I get that it's kind of tough to do that on a public health level, but I think if you're not going to give nuance, at least say that, okay, we're not certain, and give at least some room to say that we don't know it all.
Right.
and that, there's a lot more to this than what we're saying. Maybe, I don't know what the solution is, um, but there should have been a conversation that was bigger than just like showing one side of the story, which is, oh, look at all these people in hospital beds during COVID. And I'm not to minimize them at all. It's horrible if you had a loved one die from that way, but um, not everyone had the same chance of getting, severely hospitalized. And that was something that, was also a half truth. It was like, oh, hold on, we're talking about this as if it's a one size fits all virus that just
Mm.
kills everything it touches. No, hold on. No, no, no. Because there's a study that was actually referenced by the CDC that I mentioned in the book. I believe it was like the International or European Journal of Immunology, something like that, but you can find it in the book. And it basically says that for people, my age, I believe it was from 18 to like mid 30s, you had a much higher risk of dying in a car accident than dying from COVID.
Mm.
Like it was at least twofold greater, right? And so it was like, we're not weighing the cost. Like, are we going to stop driving cars? No, we're not. And so, okay, let's not be stupid and go and, go to raves and stuff like that. But like,
Right.
let's figure out what we can do to like actually make ourselves more resilient. And that was something that was also another kind of half truth that was, it still is kind of prevalent to this day with COVID.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I remember when I was in my 20s, and this was kind of the first moment I was like, oh, wait a minute. I was studying for my certification to be a personal trainer. And I remember getting really frustrated how many different experts out there had opposing views, like completely opposing opposite views on so many topics around health. And I was like, wait a minute. This
Yeah,
says this, and this expert says the opposite. So which one is it? And I remember
it's confusing.
they don't really know.
Mm,
And it's probably that everybody's body's different. So one might work for, like you said, a group of people, and one might work for another group of people. And that was kind of the first eye-opening moment for me around that. But yeah, I would have to agree with, I mean, I went through and had my own pandemic experience with almost dying my first round of COVID in 2020. But it was because I didn't get treated. I didn't get treated until day 12 when my lungs were shutting down. And I was lucky enough to find a pediatrician who had a protocol in place, and he saved my life. And, you know, it was incredible. But I got it a second time about 6 months ago, and it proved everything because, the first time I was about 2 days away from not making it. And this time I got on the protocol right away on day two, symptoms are gone. I beat it in 6 days. So
yeah,
I was like, okay, so it's not because I have asthma as an underlying condition. I'm not in that
right.
bracket you know, of, older people, which I've also interviewed people in their 60s and 70s with multiple underlying health conditions, and they were barely sick. They maybe got cold
Yeah,
like symptoms for a day or two. I'm like, okay, none of this makes any sense. So yeah, I would agree. It's
yeah,
turned
yeah.
into more of a control mechanism than an actual, like, let's talk about the facts and like actually deal with health.
Of course, yeah, and it's not to say that like I'm not trying to be like arrogant and say like, oh, if you do everything in the book, you're going to be so immune to disease, you're never going to get like, no, of course, like there's genetic variation, and there's people who've been lifelong smokers and like they get COVID and they're asymptomatic, right? It's like
Yeah.
there's some parts of it that we can't control, but why don't we instead focus on the things that we can control, which was really my main issue with the whole pandemic.
Yeah, it's so important to, learn your own knowledge and be in control of your own health. Now, around this whole pandemic, a phrase has popped up. It's this new catchphrase, I trust the science. And this phrase has kind of been used to argue a stance on specific big pharma created medications, et cetera. So what are your thoughts on this catchphrase around I trust the science?
I think sometimes I think it's well intentioned, um, but I think it's not true, and I think oftentimes it's kind of like a virtue signal. I think people really want to be aligned with quote unquote the truth. The only problem is that no one knows quote unquote the truth because, like you said, the most credentialed health professional is still not going to know it all and is not going to know it to like a a solid degree, like, oh, this is 100% like you never hear, or you should never hear health professionals say this is proven to be safe and effective, right? That should never happen. It should say this suggests this. And so to say I trust the science is kind of like, um, it's just like in itself is wrong, because when you're saying I trust the science, sorry, but like science isn't a belief system. It's not something that you can just like say like I trust it. Science is something that's always evolving. So if you're trusting the science, okay, then that means that you trust the process of questioning and always questioning. And so it doesn't mean that hold up one study that kind of affirms your bias. It truly means, if you were honest about what I trust the science meant, then you would say, I trust the scientific process. I trust in truth. If a study comes up that, kind of argues with my belief, I'm going to be as objective as I can and listen to people who have different views than me, because there's clearly evidence on the other side. That would be, I trust the science for real, not the kind of I trust the science that a lot of people were kind of saying to affirm or, kind of tell people that their views sucked and their own views are better.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's this division thing. It creates division, and it's not the way I think of it as science is, like you said, it's not a belief system. It's a process of analyzing data. And,
Yeah.
you know, and it depends. It's always evolving. It's never stuck in place. We'll come up with, analyze it, we'll come up with this answer now, but it's not definitely a fact, but it changes, as time goes on and more scientists analyze. And it makes me think of like physics and quantum mechanics, for example. If you take both of those sciences, they oppose each other. Like the
Hmm.
laws of one completely negate the laws of the other. But because most scientists, studying the inner workings of things on a mass scale, opposed to the scientists that are studying the inner workings of things at a very tiny, tiny microscopic level, they don't really mix and mingle. They kind of do one or the other. So they kind of ignore it.
Yeah, 100%. And I think
People,
like the best person is like Dr. Joe Dispenza, who kind of tries to mix the two, right? Because we know that like the majority, I believe it's like 99% of like every atom is like empty space, right? It's like, how do you get your head around that?
absolutely. Yeah. And it's just, I think it's a prime example of how science isn't a belief system. And it's,
Yeah.
there are science based ideas out there that oppose and negate other science ideas, and we have discussions around them, and that's okay.
Exactly. I
So
agree.
switching gears, let's get into EMFs. For those that don't know, electromagnetic frequencies, and we're going to be talking about man-made EMFs. For those that don't know much about EMFs, what are they? How can they affect our health? Do they play a role in the current health crisis? Should we be concerned?
Okay, so I actually tomorrow, I don't know when this episode will drop, but tomorrow, mid-August, I'll be releasing an interview that I did with Dr. Rob Brown, who was the first person that I've ever seen actually co-author a study on. It was titled something along the lines of like EMFs in the immune system, like a connection between 5G and COVID-19. And I was like, wow, okay, this is interesting, because I was working during the pandemic with the Environmental Health Trust a little bit, and they're an amazing resource on EMFs. If anyone wants to learn more about science-based, like they have it. And so that's kind of how I started to learn about like what EMFs were, and were they problematic? And so this paper by Dr. Rob Brown finally kind of painted EMFs in a light that was very evidence-based, and not like we heard at the beginning of the pandemic by some people that said, oh, 5G causes COVID. It's
Right.
like, God, like everyone, yeah, right. And like everyone at the Environmental Health Trust that I was kind of speaking with and working with, they were just like so disappointed, because they were like, oh, this crazy conspiracy theory is going to get people off of the real dangers of EMFs. It's going to kind of direct the focus away. And the people who are already like, okay, go get a tinfoil hat, buddy, they're going to be even more prone to saying that. They're going to be even less open to the evidence that EMFs are problematic for our health. So that was kind of like the starting point with EMFs. And then Dr. Rob Brown talked about it in a way that makes a lot of sense. And I would look into his blog. He has a blog, and he's been on other kind of podcasts to talk about this topic. But really, the way I look at it, EMFs are kind of disrupting our normal state of like inflammation. They're disrupting our normal like cellular processes. And one of the theorized ways is by a researcher named Dr. Martin Pall, whereby these EMFs, these man-made EMFs, Wi-Fi, cell phones, cell phone towers, all of these things create more calcium inside of the cell because they are voltage gated calcium channels within our whole body. They're very sensitive to these EMFs. And so they open them up and they allow calcium to rush into the cell. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing in normal context, but if this happens chronically, the final one of the last steps in this whole cascade of signaling effects that happens is an increase in superoxide, an increase in oxidants and things that damage our cells. And so that's one of the mechanisms. I know there are many more that are theorized, but it really does. There are a lot of associations between EMF exposure and anxiety and depression. And there are people, I believe the World Health Organization says like around like 10% of people, like 1 to 10, I believe is the correct number, are electrosensitive.
Right.
So they walk into a room that has EMF like 25 yards away and they're going to get sick. Like they're going to get nauseous. They're, not going to be able to think well. They're just going to feel like they just got ill. And so for those people, like obviously, yeah, like they can't do much of anything. They have to work from home. But the rest of us are still not to that same extent, but we are still prone to damage from EMFs. So even if you don't like feel it, there's still likely something going on there. So yeah, like with EMFs, I would say they've definitely played a role in our pandemic. And we know that one of the most well-known mechanisms by which COVID turns into something more severe is inflammation. And inflammation is like one of the root causes for a lot of things, like everything. So how do we say, how can you say that, EMFs are not tied to COVID if EMFs create more inflammation, leading to potentially more severe COVID? Now, you made a really good distinction when you said man-made EMFs, 100%, because if we go outside and we, are in the jungle and there's no cell towers or anything like that, we're going to be getting frequencies from the earth. I believe it's called the Schumann resonance. And so that is actually very healing. And now you're getting this kind of resurgence of the other side of the EMF story, which is like PEMF devices, which pulsed electromagnetic fields, which are actually a therapy. And they're actually anti-inflammatory.
I'm wearing one right now.
Yeah, yeah, really. Yeah, so that's the thing with EMFs. It's a double-edged sword because there are some frequencies that are harmful, and there are some frequencies that seem to really be very healing. And like, for example, grounding. That's something that also, like, I'll mention that to my friends, and they're like, "Okay, all right, hippie, like you've been in the jungle too long." But it's true, and there's research to back it up. You go outside and you take off your shoes, and you are barefoot on the grass or on the beach, you're getting this flow of electrons that is going to decrease inflammation. And they've done studies where the blood viscosity is actually lower by grounding, right? Which again, another one of the mechanisms by which COVID became more severe is, your blood, like blood thickening, like clotting, right? Like the blood clotting was a big thing. Like the thrombosis was one of the things that really made you more likely to have a very severe, like multi-organ failure, for
Right.
example. So yeah, this is kind of the story with EMFs, and this is something that I really want to explore more with PEMF devices. I've never tried them, but I definitely want to get on that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That was fascinating. I've never heard the specific, kind of scientific, what actually happens at a cellular level with EMFs. I mean, I've known about, they're not good for us and, they can cause damage, but I didn't know the specifics. So that was fascinating. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think that I guess with the 5G is just a lot stronger than the previous version. So it probably just causes more more of that damage. And then I would assume it's kind of like eating a bad diet and packaged foods where we could be fine for like 10, 20, 30 years, but maybe it's like this buildup of
Yeah.
inflammation and stuff in the body where one day it will just kind of overload and hit us.
Yes. Yeah. Well, 5G is a huge issue because it's not only like the frequency that's changing, it's much, much higher in frequency, which means much higher energy. The higher the frequency, the shorter the wavelength, the higher the kind of like the power that it gives you and the stronger that it is. And the problem really is that these towers are going to be so close together that you are not going to be able to escape. If you live in a big city, like you are just like there. And like no matter how much you do to mitigate it, like you can mitigate it to a certain extent, but you're just going to be like bombarded by that stuff. You will not be able to get away. Yeah. Yeah. So that's one of the big problems with 5G.
That's interesting. Yeah, because it's more powerful, but it can't travel as far. I think
Exactly.
the difference
Exactly.
between that and the
Yes.
version of it. Now you talk about grounding. Are there any other great biohacks that you've learned to, we could all try to mitigate exposure in this modern world? Sounds like with the 5G, it would
Yeah.
be hard, but
Yeah, so it would be hard. But there's a few things. So the first one would be, and this is very mechanistic. I'm not going to say like this has been like proven in a randomized controlled trial because also like who would ever conduct a randomized controlled trial on what I'm about to tell you? But magnesium would be one thing. Because magnesium, I mean, you see it throughout my book. It's in every chapter almost because it has a role to play in a lot of things, including stress and kind of like DNA repair. So magnesium would be one thing. Part of that reasoning is because it works as like a voltage gated calcium channel blocker. So it actually blocks the mechanism of action by which EMFs work on our cells. And so by doing that, the idea is that you're going to mitigate some of the damage. And again, it's very like mechanism. I don't think there's actually like a study done on like humans to see, okay, we're giving them magnesium, we're exposing them to EMFs, let's see what their inflammation markers are. I don't know that that study exists, but just because the benefits outweigh any risk that magnesium. So that's one thing is magnesium. Another thing would be
and
take good
before you
care.
move on to the other
Yeah.
thing, what's the best source of magnesium or that you found? Is it that powder we get that's called Calm? Is there a good source
Yeah.
you found?
Yeah, so magnesium calm is definitely like the most widely known one
Right.
because it's very too bioavailable and it actually like draws too much water into your intestine, which then makes you like have very loose stools. So if you're not careful with that, you're not absorbing it, you're pooping it out.
Right.
So I don't like citrate as much unless you have a problem with constipation, then maybe it could be good for you. But I like forms like magnesium malate more. Jigsaw Health Magnesium SRT, they have a good form, which I always recommend. And the weird thing about magnesium is there are so many different forms of it that each one has like a slightly different impact. So you have like magnesium L-threonate, which is better absorbed in the brain. You have like magnesium orotate and taurate and taurinate, which have been shown to help with depression symptoms. So it's really weird because there's a lot of them. And I have 2 episodes on like all about magnesium on my podcast, so which you can check out if you want. Yeah, so those would be like the main forms. The L-threonate and the malate I like to use those.
Good to know. Thank you.
Oh, glycinate too. I forgot that one. Yeah.
Beautiful. And any other great biohacking besides magnesium you'd recommend or you've learned about?
Yeah, definitely. So, first would be taking good care of your sleep. Melatonin is obviously like a very strong scavenger of free radicals. It's very anti-cancer. And actually, the World Health Organization has actually listed blue light at night as a possible carcinogen because it lowers melatonin. So, night shift workers, for example, who are exposed to light at night have an increased incidence of cancer because their melatonin is being disrupted by light at night. So being very careful with your sleep, really making that a kind of like a self-care routine where, a few hours before bed, you put on your blue blockers, you limit any like very bright light. And you go out in the sunlight in the mornings. You get some sunlight during the day. I mean, all the things that we already talked about are going to help you have more naturally produced melatonin. I don't recommend, supplementing melatonin. There's just like problems with the supplement and taking too much of it, especially like for male health. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend that, but getting it
That has something to
naturally.
do with testosterone that can affect
Yeah,
testosterone
exactly.
release. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, it affects it can just tank your testosterone levels, especially because melatonin supplements have been shown to be, like up to like 100 times more than it says on the bottle. So
Right.
you might be getting a huge dose that you might not even know about,
Right.
which sucks. Like I think like supplements have to be like way more, we have to be way more strict with the supplements we take because not all of them are created equal. Um, and then omega 3s has actually been something that seems to be neuroprotective against EMFs. And again, you can find a lot of these resources on the Environmental Health Trust. They've shown the studies with magnesium potentially being helpful and with omega 3s. So my best form of omega 3s, which like a lot of people will cringe, and I did when I started eating them, but sardines, wild caught sardines are an incredible source of omega 3s.
Mhm.
Wild caught salmon is great. Really getting omega 3s from animal foods primarily because plant foods, you get ALA, but you're not getting like the DHA and not very much EPA sometimes unless you get algae. But uh, it's a poor conversion from the ALA into the more active forms.
Understood. So it's really about giving your body the proper minerals and vitamins and things it needs to kind of combat it at a cellular level.
Yeah, exactly. And you can also talk about things like anything that will reduce your inflammation is probably something that's, a good thing, like just having a good diet, having enough nutrient dense foods. And at that point is, once you have your foundation diet that you like and that's making you feel good, if there's still something missing, that's where I think supplements come in. But supplements should not be like a replacement to foods you're not eating. Um, so yeah, like trying to make sure that whatever you do in your life is decreasing inflammation, whether that be, like on the mental side of meditations or whether that be going and, spending some time with friends. Like I believe all of that stuff are just going to make us more resilient to stuff.
Yeah, that's everything. Inflammation, gut health, and our nervous
Yeah.
system. Get those in check.
Yeah.
It's going to save you further down the line and in the present as well. I remember watching a
100%.
documentary a couple of years ago about EMFs and people that are hypersensitive, like you were talking about. And I don't know if it's really a thing, but they were talking about EMF, like paint. You can paint your home with EMF
Yeah.
kind of blocking paint. They have window coverings and fabrics that are EMF blocking. People had kind of bed canopies made out of them and rugs where they're
Yes.
hypersensitive. I thought that was fascinating.
Yes. I would love to do that. It's just like the cost and like it's just not as widely available. People like aren't as willing to do that. I know. They're not willing to go to the extreme unless they're really, really suffering with their health. But yeah, like the EMF proofing, like the building biologists can help with that. And like even making like what are they called? These Faraday cages, like somewhere in your house where you can have a place that's totally EMF proof,
Yeah,
is something that I would like to have at some point.
absolutely. Yeah, I was looking into it at the time because I lived in an apartment in Los Angeles, and they had every single satellite dish on the roof right above my apartment. And I felt,
Yeah.
I mean, it was right above my bed and I was having trouble sleeping. And I was like, what is going on? And I'm like, all the satellites are right above me. I think I need, so I was like, I'm going to paint my room
Oh
with
man.
paint and get like a canopy. So
Yeah. Yeah.
there's a lot out there. Now, for those who want to contact you, to work with you and learn more about what you're doing, where can we do so and find your book? And do you have any other great
hmm
resources around health and wellness, your podcast we can all check out?
Yeah. So you can reach me, you can find me on Instagram at live.dam.well. In the link there, you'll kind of find everything else. So I write articles on Medium. Sometimes I'll have like podcast episodes every other week. on my podcast, the Live Damn Well podcast. You can find that on YouTube and on every single podcast platform. My book you can find on Amazon. Just type in Return to Human and just click the little filter for books so that it shows up. And other than that, that's pretty much everything on my side of things. But I would definitely recommend you check out Dr. Gabor Mate's work on trauma. I think that's something that a lot of people aren't as aware of, with that being like a really important root cause for health or disease. It's trauma. And it can help explain a lot of your behaviors and have more compassion for yourself, which is important when you need patience to kind of make some headway into your health, is compassion. So I would look into Dr. Gabor Mate's work and Dr. Joe Dispenza's work, which is also amazing.
Yes, he's great. I'll post a link to all those below, and for your, your website, contact, social media, book, etc., and a lot of the other great things we talked about. I'll post links below to those as well. Before we wrap it up, do you have any final thoughts for those listening who want to improve their health and learn more, but they need some ideas on kind of where to begin or how to begin?
Well, I would just begin with the kind of like the concept of ancestral living. Really start there, like start to think about, start to research what was life like before we had all this like fancy stuff and all the, antibacterial cleaners and all this kind of stuff. Like, what was life really like? Especially like in developing countries, I think they're closer to what that was like. Not to make that seem glamorous or anything, but there's specific things that they do that we're not doing that is potentially problematic. So look into like the Hadza, for example, which I mentioned in my book. They're like one of the last few remaining hunter-gatherer tribes on the planet, and they've been very well studied for their habits and the food they eat and the sunlight exposure they get in the community. Start there.
Beautiful. Yeah, the blue zones in the world. There are people out there that are thriving and doing well, and yes, we can learn from them. Thank you so much. Well, thank you for joining us today and sharing your journey, as well as all this great information, how we can take control of our own health, information around the EMFs, and how to sort through all this information out there that's getting thrown at us. And thank you as well for the work you are doing in helping others improve their own health.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Remember, knowledge is power. The more you understand about your body, the better you're able to stay healthy and prevent disease. And a reminder, I'm not your doctor. Please don't take this as medical advice. If you have specific questions about your health care, feel free to reach out to your practitioner. And if you like this video, please like and share it with others. This information could really help someone you may know. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button to be sure you don't miss out on our future shows. And I will see you all next Wednesday on the next episode of Discovering True Health.